Members, good morning. This is the first meeting in 2025 of the Subcommittee on Issues Relating to the Support for Persons with Disabilities. Let's welcome representatives from the administration. Our first discussion item is creating a barrier-free living environment for persons with disabilities, PWD. I'd like to give the floor to Mr. Ho Kai-ming, Undersecretary for Labor and Welfare, to take us through the papers CB-1215/2025-01. Thank you, Mr. Ho. Members who would like to speak, please press the button. Thank you, Madam Chair. Good morning. We're going to report to members on our measures for creating a barrier-free living environment for PWD. Our policy is to provide a barrier-free environment for PWD to enable them to have a barrier-free access to premises and make use of the facilities and services on an equal basis with others. This will help them to live independently and fully integrate into society. We have Design Manual Barrier-Free Access 2008. For all new private buildings and all alterations or additions to existing private buildings, they will have to comply with the rules under the Buildings Ordinance and the Building Planning Regulations. In February 2024, we commissioned a consultant to review the design manual to enhance the standards of barrier-free facilities in private buildings. The aim is to align with the latest standards and international trends. We want to make it feasible and pragmatic in local setting. It is expected to be completed in the first quarter of 2026. We also aim to cater for the needs of the elderly in relation to accessibility. In new housing estates, we have adopted universal design and accessibility. Starting from 2021, the government put in place the Universal Accessibility Program. We have been retrofitting ramps, lifts to enhance the convenience of the public in using public walkways. We maintain close liaison with different organizations and groups to make sure the standards of these accessibility measures align with their needs. On digital accessibility, we have been launching the Digital Accessibility Campaign since 2011. We want to make it convenient for the disabled to access information online as well as to use services conveniently. Since 2011, the government has been launching the Access Coordinator and Access Officer scheme. Apart from the Labor and Welfare Bureau, we have the Buildings Department representative joining us today. We are willing to take members' questions. Thank you. There are 5 members who would like to speak, 5 minutes each, questions and answers included. Dr. Tick, Deputy Chair, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. Take very good care. I wish you good health. Hong Kong has been making improvements in this regard after I read the papers. In new buildings, I understand there are better passageways for citizens as well as PWDs. Existing legislation seems to be fragmented. There are regulations for one building, for example. There are ramps, narrow sidewalks on the streets. When a PWD goes from the street to a building, it's not accessible enough. So the concept is not well-rounded enough. We have a concept around the world that is the universal design concept. But in a paper, this concept is very ambiguous. That is, for the use of different people to the greatest extent. These elements are being taken forward in a fragmented manner. The contents and standards internationally are quite detailed. When you have such facilities, it doesn't mean they are accessible enough. For instance, in MTR stations, PWDs need to go a long way before they can use the accessible facilities. Under the concept of universal design, will the government consider having legislation or issuing better guidelines? Will the administration provide a timeline in implementing accessibility programs or measures? Right now, the government puts in place a $2 scheme and encourages the PWDs to move around in society. There are more wheelchair users in the streets. In Mongkok, there are many tourists, whereas roads are narrow. Pedestrians and wheelchair users compete for space on the road. It is not convenient to wheelchair users and at the same time pedestrians as well. Is there any room for improvement in relation to street in order to avoid crashes between wheelchairs and pedestrians? The government has access officers. They check whether accessibility measures are implemented in buildings. Is it possible to have a task group in district councils? It will be under the purview of the HYAB, I understand this. The district council should play this role. Under Secretary, I'll say a few words and then I will give the floor to my colleague to supplement. The concept of universal design applies to new buildings or buildings with new alterations and additions. For older buildings, there are pre-existing restrictions. Say we went to Tycoon. Within the building structure, there are accessibility features. If one needs to walk from Central to Tycoon, we need to take into account the slope of the road. It is not the case that the district council is not willing to make improvements, but then the sidewalks are not wide enough. These are pre-existing restrictions in relation to the roads nearby. Can we access Tycoon from Sai Ying Pun instead of Central? We need to make it convenient for PWDs to access Tycoon without the help of others. There are restrictions, there are limitations, but we need to try different methods to enhance the accessibility of the facility. Mr. Fletch Chan, indeed, for new buildings or for new facilities, they will comply with the latest guidelines. However, for existing buildings, there are geographical constraints. But we don't sit on our hands. Since 2012, we have been retrofitting footbridges, lifts, and so on. We want to provide convenience to wheelchair users to allow them to go to more places. This way, they can overcome difficulties in relation to slopes or other restrictions on the roads. Wheelchair users cannot access all places in Hong Kong, but we have a mechanism. On the streets, sometimes there is an even ground. We have a mechanism to undertake minor works by the Highways Department to improve the road conditions. In relation to buildings, I'll give the floor to the Buildings Department to supplement. Ms. Karen Zhang, for new buildings, they will have to comply with legislation. For alterations and additions work to be conducted, guidelines and legislation have to be complied with. To fulfill all the requirements, indeed, there are difficulties. In our work in the past, say tycoon, one will have to submit a plan. The plan has to be approved. There is an existing mechanism to put in place alternative facilities. So in our soon-to-be revised guidelines, we will add chapters to provide more guidance, suggestions for the industry. For existing buildings, if there are structural issues making it difficult to build a ramp, is it possible to have a movable ramp instead that will make it convenient for wheelchair users to access the building? Next, Professor Chen Wen-Kwong. Thank you, Madam Chair. I have a few problems. I have a few questions on the paper submitted by the administration. There are existing ordinances to regulate private buildings to make sure certain guidelines are complied with. For existing buildings, minimum standards are adopted to meet the legal requirements. Earlier on, over half of the shopping centers in Hong Kong failed to meet all requirements. Some miscellaneous items are piled up. The signage isn't clear either. I'd like to know whether orders are issued to these subpar buildings. In most restaurants, supermarkets, there's a lack of accessibility facilities for the disabled. Say the aisle within supermarkets are quite narrow. Wheelchair users cannot move around in these supermarkets. How can you incentivize stores to provide accessible facilities in order to provide a better barrier-free living environment for the PWD? We have an aging population. There will be a more acute demand for such facilities in Hong Kong. As early as in 2008, the design manual Barrier-Free Access was issued. I'd like to know the public expenditure involved. According to the paper last year in February, the administration commissioned a consultant to undertake this work, and this will only be completed in the first quarter of 2026. I'd like to know why it will take 2 years to complete this exercise. Is there any room for compressing the timetable? Ms. Karen Zhang, when it comes to buildings, starting from 1985, we have a piece of legislation to provide passageways for PWDs. There are updates and follow-ups from time to time. All over these years, there have been enhancements and updates in relation to the ordinance. And buildings were actually built in accordance with the legislation back then. Some buildings were built meeting the requirements of the legislation back then, so they complied with the legislation back then. It is for this reason that some older buildings don't necessarily meet the requirements of existing legislation, but then they did meet the requirements of the legislation back then. In our new guidelines, which we will update soon, we will add more chapters. minor works can be put in place to improve the accessible measures and facilities to make it more convenient for PWDs. And this will be one of our highlights in our review of the design manual.
As for the second question, that is a consultancy study. I have information on that study, but I don't have it with me now. I would provide it later. As for the timeline, it's a very compressed one. The previous review before this lasted even longer. So last year, our consultant reviewed some foreign experience and the existence of different guidelines and manual in Hong Kong. They have conducted the first round of consultation with in the form of focus groups and so on to collect views from stakeholders. And now they need some time to collate the views. At this stage, the consultant has come up with some preliminary design, some preliminary suggestions. Now they are conducting the second stage of consultation. So they would like to benefit from foreign experience, overseas experience, and views from stakeholders to come up with something for stakeholders and for the relevant sectors, which may have different needs and demands. And from this stage, they will proceed on to the stage of detailed design. I have a question about the cost of the consultancy study. We have a fiscal deficit, and I'm very mindful of what the consultant can do when we spend the money on such a study. I can provide the relevant statistics or the funding level in writing. It's curious that you are in charge of this, but you don't know the expenditure. The next member, Mr. Stanley Lee. Providing a barrier-free living environment to the PWDs is something I really subscribe to. And we need to have empathy in policy design. If you keep in mind their needs, then you would be able to meet their needs. Well, I appreciate your efforts to update and improve your guidelines and menu to gradually and continuously improve the barrier-free environment. But at present, there are still shortcomings. And on this part, apart from LWB, other departments and bureaus must also chip in. There should be interdepartmental collaboration to provide barrier-free facilities for PWDs. I've noticed that I've been informed by some members of the public and PWDs that in some old buildings, such as tenement buildings, there are problems with facilities. For example, they need to have a lift, a wheelchair lift, if they don't have a ramp or an escalator or lift for PWDs. And now perhaps the care team, the district care teams can have a mobile lift available for deployment in various districts where there's a need. PWDs have also got a need to visit clinics for consultation. But there are many buses which are not equipped with a low platform, a low curb platform. You should talk to the Transport and Logistics Bureau to make sure that these light buses are equipped with the relevant facility for PWDs, which need to take them, who need to take them to clinics. In some private housing estates, I've been actually told by some chairman of their owners' corporations, they may need to review some land for the purpose of providing a ramp, but they need to get approval from the government and also to pay some premium. Perhaps the government can provide some relief if a certain number of threshold is met in terms of the people using the ramps. The government would be able to provide some concessionary treatment. If this can be done, then people would certainly understand that you'd act with empathy. Well, for the next item, we are going to take up light buses for PWDs. So I will take that up at that point. For the other, I would like to other questions. I'd like the Commissioner to take it up. Well, yes, it's a good idea, worth considering that we may provide some stair escalators and a wheelchair lift. In cases where it would be difficult to provide traditional ramp. Ideas such as stair lift is worth considering. But the question is the stair lift very convenient as a piece of equipment to deploy? Well, we will pay attention to some exoskeleton technology. Well, it's not a mature technology, but as things and technology advance, well, we would certainly try to adopt some. We'll pay attention to the issue to see whether the member suggestion can be taken forward. As for the building-related issues, I'll defer to my colleague from the Buildings Department. As we have mentioned, the existing legal requirement is that when there are additions or alterations, then the building design has to be brought up to date to comply with current day standards. If there are difficulties in providing standard facilities, we will provide advice. It's indeed true that sometimes the building owners have to submit a plan in order to provide a ramp, and then we can certainly consider waiving the fees for the plan approval. I have a comment for the buildings department. Well, you have certain procedures and formalities in place, and which owners find difficult to navigate. So perhaps you should try to be more helpful on the question of stair lift. The design nowadays is very good. I have tried one in Ma'anshan. I sit on a wheelchair and use the stair lift to both go up and down. You can go up and down the stair with that equipment. So please look into this. It may be difficult to have one in every neighborhood, but for every care teams in the say in the districts or 5 to be shared, that would be good. Mr. Andrew Lam, on the issue of barrier-free environment. Please speak closer to the mic. I understand that time is needed to improve the environment. We have 2 observations. In some cases where the new requirements do apply, so when they started to have property handover to owners, when they started to hand over, they fulfill all the requirements But then afterwards, some facilities will be altered, such for example, tactile path for the visually impaired. Of course, you say that when they find things inconvenient, the affected parties can lodge a complaint to the departments. But the question is, the design had already been approved by the department beforehand. But the affected user may not understand, may not know exactly when the building plan was approved. So there's a need to offer more assistance. And secondly, it's not really just about buildings. I'm also talking about public walkway and pavement and road and pedestrian facilities and road facilities. I hope more coordination can be made among government departments. On barrier-free access, sometimes you can rely on the lift towers built by the government, but sometimes the lift will replace the ramp. It's okay when the lift is in operation, but when it's not in use or in operation and you don't have a ramp, there's no accessibility. So perhaps you should refer this problem to the relevant departments responsible for this. And in the industry, well, the idea of the role of the access coordinator or access officer is not really well understood. So how can you facilitate their understanding of their roles? I'm just relaying their views on this particular issue. From my experience of working in the districts, after building for universal accessibility program, after building the lift, we will not take away the ramp. But if you have some specific cases in mind, then we can look into this. There may be some reasons why the ramp has to be replaced or removed. Of course, it's best to have both to ensure accessibility. Well, a lift make it more convenient, but the ramp should be there as a standby. Commissioner? Thank you, Mr. Lam, for your question. As regards the responsibility of access coordinator and access officer, well, they are responsible for managing the access-free facilities to see if they are, after the provision of such facilities, there are problems, or whether there are problems on anything inconvenient caused to the users. So they should handle complaints. They should try to collect views. And also within their purview, they should inform their colleagues on the necessity to provide the access-free facilities to the targeted users. So they should receive views and they should act on the relevant issues.
Ms. Zhang, Assistant Director, thank you. We received comments that in the use of some facilities, say for disabled toilet, different things were put inside the toilet space. Repair and maintenance as well as management are very important. If we can better manage and repair these toilets, we can help the disabled. Poor management will lead to difficulties in using these disabled toilets. So in our new manual, we will add more chapters. There will be new chapters on repairing and maintaining these toilets. How can we better repair and maintain these toilets? If we can better manage disabled toilets, I believe we can redouble our efforts and we can make it better. Next, Ms. Rebecca Chan. Thank you, Madam Chair. Creating a barrier-free living environment requires a lot of empathy. Oftentimes, we mention for major trunk roads, we need lifts, we need ramps. I sent pictures to the Commissioner as well as the Undersecretary. In Hong Kong, we have roads lined with trees. The roots of the trees make the walkways uneven. Let alone wheelchair users, for people with prams or for people in high heels, it's actually very easy for them to trip and fall. Sidewalks are very narrow in Hong Kong. Waterloo Road, Kowloon Tong, and so on. I took pictures in these areas. I love trees. However, after a certain period of time, the root of the trees grow larger and larger. Some wheelchairs toppled. The situation is the same for prams. Trees will have to be removed then. Many government departments work together. They conducted a site visit. And the same trees will have to be planted again at the exactly same spot. When there isn't enough space for pedestrians to maneuver, can we actually move the trees elsewhere? Can we plant the trees inside a park, for example? It may be difficult to remove such a large tree, but owing to weather conditions, when we lose a tree and when we replant a tree, our existing policies are self-contradictory. Do we need to advocate a barrier-free living environment, or do we need to stick to the policy of having exactly the same trees? We can actually replant a tree inside a park, and then we can make the living environment barrier-free. Apart from lifts and ramps, let's just talk about pavements or sidewalks. I can forward the pictures to the subcommittee afterwards. I'm not asking for lifts everywhere, but then we want to have sufficient space on the streets in Hong Kong. We have an aging population in Hong Kong. Not just the disabled need to be confined to wheelchairs. I understand some trees cannot be moved, but then we do have to think we need to make it easy enough for pedestrians to maneuver on the streets. Undersecretary. Thank you, Ms. Rebecca Chan. I understand your concerns. It may not be under the purview of the buildings department. Probably the Transport and Logistics Bureau in a moment can supplement. When a tree is felled, another tree needs to be planted. Not exactly at the same spot, but we may have to ask the TLB to give us more information. I understand wheelchair users or prams may have to be forced off the sidewalks. They'll have to take the roads instead. If member doesn't mind, we can defer to the Transport and Logistics Bureau to give you more information. Mr. Flat Chan, I agree with Ms. Rebecca Chan. We have a lot of good policies, but where they are overlapped, there's room for improvement. They aren't perfect yet. We'll have to go back and study the matters mentioned by Ms. Rebecca Chan. We will also have to rationalize different guidelines or policies under different policy bureaus. We need to keep the trees. We need to maintain a number of trees planted on the road. But we also need to give pedestrians sufficient space to walk on the streets. The Highways Department is responsible for this, but then we will also have to refer to the guidelines. We need to set the priorities right. This will make it easier for colleagues responsible for these works. Ms. Rebecca Chan, this subcommittee focuses on PWDs, and this discussion item is creating a barrier-free living environment. Our next agenda item touches on mobility. For accessibility on the streets, for tiles, trees, for instance, do you pass these matters to the Transport and Logistics Bureau, or do you, the Labor and Welfare Bureau, handle this matter? I took pictures, and different policy bureaus conducted a site visit, and they said they would have to plant a new tree at exactly the same spot. Can we add creating a barrier-free living environment to the major directions? Which policy bureau will be responsible for this area? In the future, when we formulate policies, we need to bear in mind the creation of a barrier-free living environment, especially on normal roads or on normal streets. In the eyes of members of the public, there is only one government. When different policy bureaus conducted a site visit and in the end the matter could not be resolved, members of the public would be let down. They had high hopes on the government. Say we need to pass this matter to the Highways Department or to the relevant office responsible for the management of trees. We do need to make way for pedestrians to walk at ease in streets. I believe there are different guidelines which create restrictions on their work. It may be quite difficult for them, but we'll have to refer to the guidelines. We'll have to see the rationale behind the guidelines. That's exactly why I said we will have to rationalize different guidelines. Where there are conflicts, we'll have to set the priorities right. Thank you. I'll go back and study this issue. Thank you. I understand from the paper there is access coordinator. And the coordinator is responsible for enhancing the accessibility of government premises and facilities. He or she is also responsible for coordinating accessibility issues within individual bureau or department. Well, basically, different policy bureaus or departments have an access coordinator as well. Next member, Ms. Doreen Kong. Thank you, Ms. Rebecca. Well, thank you, Madam Chair. We have two discussion items: creating a barrier-free living environment for PWDs, as well as measures and services to facilitate the mobility of PWDs. These two issues are interlinked. We should have the Transport and Logistics Bureau with us as well. I agree with Ms. Rebecca Chan. This subcommittee focuses on PWDs, and we are discussing the creation of a barrier-free living environment for them. Well, I agree that we need to create a barrier-free living environment not just for the PWDs, but we also need to build such an environment for the elderly as well as for different people in the community. People may think that accessibility only has to do with PWDs, and for those who are able-bodied, they won't care about such an issue. We need to attach more importance to this issue. Otherwise, no one will care about this issue. We have to handle matters facing or handle problems facing the disabled or the elderly in Hong Kong. We oftentimes attach the label of costs or a burden to these issues. We shouldn't use a cost center approach to these issues. If we take the perspective of social costs or social burden, even after 2 decades, we won't be able to improve their living environment. We shouldn't think of these issues as social costs or social burden. We should adopt the perspective of inclusiveness. We should bear in mind the economic benefits that a barrier-free living environment will bring. For example, when PWDs move around in society, there will also be more vibrancy in the economy in Hong Kong. The government has the responsibility for creating a barrier-free living environment for PWDs. Now, we only have manuals to issue to different developers. Ms. Rebecca Chen mentioned tree roots protruding from road surfaces. Say in Tokyo, they have large trees as well. There aren't any tree roots protruding from the ground. Say for Tokyo, Kyoto, they are ancient towns, but then we don't see such phenomena in these cities. That's exactly because we don't have any intent to solve these problems in Hong Kong. When it comes to creating a barrier-free living environment in Hong Kong, the government has the major responsibility. For other cities, the government is responsible for widening the roads. Just yesterday, in Singapore, in their public houses, when they need to perform alteration works in their houses, it's possible for them to do so. The government needs to take a proactive approach in relation to creating a barrier-free living environment for PWDs. This issue is close to my heart. I care about PWDs a lot. There are old buildings and structures in society. So what concrete measures does the administration have to help with the alterations of these old buildings? What incentive do you have? How can you encourage the alteration of older buildings? They lack money, so how can they go about creating a barrier-free living environment? Is there any regular repair and maintenance scheme or inspection targeting government structures or government buildings? Well, I will be quick. Just one more question. As for access officer, as Ms. Rebecca Chan, is there any representative from the disabled, from organizations of the disabled? If not, I think we should have representative from these organizations to be access officers.
On supporting the PWDs and facilitate their mobility, we really spare no effort. Well, we have issued a code of practice which the architect and the building owner have to follow. It's mandatory. They have to comply with the relevant codes. I don't know what other countries are doing on this same subject. But of course, in urban planning and urban design, we have different difficulties to overcome. We are a densely populated community. We are cramped in terms of space. But the government do attach importance to this. So when we attend UN meetings, we were complimented for our efforts compared with other places. Today, we are here to very pragmatically discuss how different issues and obstacles can be overcome. And as I can see, in other countries, their metro systems are not always equipped with lifts. But here, although we are a very densely populated community, we will try our very best to provide more. All I want to say is that we do attach a lot of importance to this, and we are working on the issues. Let me see if the commissioner or the other departments have anything to supplement here. I understand the points made by Ms. Rebecca Chan on how we can handle some concurrent issues, such as the need for tree planting and the need for barrier-free access. I totally agree with the Undersecretary. Let me say this. We do not regard barrier-free access as a burden. Otherwise, we wouldn't have spent so much money on lift systems and ramps and so on. We need to do a lot of access on how we or where we place the landing of, say, a footbridge, etc. We want to make sure that our community is inclusive. If you visit Tokyo, you know that, you have to use a stair to access the road surface from the underground station, but not in Hong Kong. Well, the access coordinator is not a government official. It's for government departments, not for NGOs. Well, they are responsible for receiving the views and comments, because they will be working in the same place, in the same venue. So if people have views or suggestions for improvements or shortcomings with regard to the facilities, they can offer suggestions and make comments, and the coordinator would take up such comments for consideration. Well, we would establish, we believe that the cost is $7 million. Some members would like to speak for a second round. 4 minutes for questions and answers. Dr. Teck Chi Yuen. Well, members have raised some very specific questions, and officials have been doing their very best to answer questions. My question is, what can we do after this meeting? They have answered our questions. We look at the issues, and then what? The commissioner will talk to the departments on making certain adjustments. Well, I'm quite confident that you would get nothing. You would achieve nothing. Yes, we have done some good measures, footbridge, etc., where we applaud such efforts. So you mentioned Tokyo, the metro system, and they're not as good. Should we then put the issues to rest, and that's it? Well, the departments have done everything required of them under the law, and also the property developer would provide the lifts and the RAM and etc. as required. But what about looking at the standards from a higher perspective? Well, in Singapore, they talk about accessibility design. We are asking them to do what is required under the law. But they are asking that the facilities can really be make use of in a convenient way, and make sure that the facilities provided can really be put to good use. And we are now only providing an alternative access, say, to the MTR station or to a building, a venue, although a roundabout a way is required. You have to make sure that the design is really convenient to use. You don't just say we should provide a lift. Or perhaps you can approach the departments with the design manual, you can also work with the Equal Opportunities Commission. Yesterday, I attended a ceremony to give awards to good design in a barrier-free design. And also for the URA board, can we have someone representing PWDs so that the policies can be amended at that level, at the policy level, instead of doing something for individual projects? I hope you would do that, Madam Chair. You should ask the government to do this. Otherwise, the issues will remain issues, notwithstanding today's discussion. I think this question, I see things rather differently from Mr. Tig. Of course, people need to deal with different issues, with different priorities. In Hong Kong, it's a question of actual implementation. Even if we talk about legal requirements in the law, we need to make sure that things can be implemented. Well, we have a full set of legal requirements, but is it that we can discover that in a particular corner in Kowloon Tong, we are going to face such and such problems if we have this design? Of course, we have the commissioner who is responsible for the overall coordination. Yes, of course, we need to try to our best to coordinate with different departments, but we should not try to belittle our achievements. Of course, things are never in the best possible forms. And actually, as a matter of fact, we have yet to still cover a few more MTR stations with barrier-free access. And as for representation of PWDs of certain boards, we would invite the relevant policy bureaus to consider. For the provision of access coordinator, we just want to make sure that for individual venues and buildings, we have someone there who are doing their job there. If we appoint PWDs to do this job, and the PWD is not always there, that would beat the original policy intent. Of course, we will deal with problems as they are discovered. Thank you, Dr. Tick, for understanding that I may not be able to do everything. Well, sometimes we need to consult with different departments. If I cannot get things done, perhaps I can escalate this to an upper level, so that we can work something out. Well, of course, of government or officers at different levels are responsible for different purviews. But of course, we will be tasked with different duties. For example, I would do my best to assure that there is barrier-free access, and when there's other problems with other departments, or I may have to elevate the matter to a higher level so that we can seek solutions. For the access coordinator and access officers, well, you're saying that they are so-called resident staff, but they will only act on complaints or when they receive some comments. Well, I'm not saying that this should be done for every venue, but there should be a working group of sorts or other similar things to act on the issues more proactively. I'm not asking you to make inspections all around Hong Kong, but there should be regular meetings with certain organizations and to try to gain better understanding of the problems in the district, and then you can ask the access coordinator to do some actual work instead of reacting to issues. We have mentioned whether we are talking about guidelines, legal framework, or else. Well, even if this is about the legal framework, we have to. There's a need to do something. Well, if you handle the legacy hardware, so to speak, the old buildings in your way, we won't resolve the problems after, say, 100 years. And we have some facilitation equipment, for example, to assist those with mobility problems. They have some equipment in some zone for rent, for hire. I would like to certainly try on one, and I hope you would monitor the progress of the new technology. You offer such equipment for hire or for use. If it can be done, it's much cheaper than building a footbridge or a lift.
Mr. Ho, thank you. I thank Mr. Lam for his suggestions. As the Commissioner said, what PWDs need are heavier machinery, say in a jockey club event. The The machinery used by PWDs are much heavier. That is, the exoskeleton devices are much heavier. The devices are very different when it comes to those used by the able-bodied and those by the disabled. So we'll keep a close watch on technological advancements. We will look for suitable machinery or equipment to be used by PWDs. Yes, we have been keeping a close eye on the development of exoskeleton suits. I believe in the mainland, owing to its population and technology, I believe we can identify products that are high in quality and have good value for money. Next, myself, Hong Kong is an advanced city. Under Secretary, we need to think out of the box. We need to create a barrier-free living environment for the disabled and for the elderly. If policies are only steered by one single bureau, say the Labor and Welfare Bureau, then you're working in silos and you are confined to your own mindset. As member mentioned, there are old streets, tree roots protrude from tiles on the ground affecting the pavement. In Changquano, in Ma On Shan, there are similar problems as well. And is attributable to the mindset of the government. Comparing with other Asian cities, how good is our environment? Well, just now we talked about PWDs, we talked about those with mobility difficulties, but we didn't mention the visually impaired. When it comes to transport, how many barrier-free facilities have we created for the convenience of the visually impaired? Say digital accessibility, how can they help the visually impaired? Last week, I took MTR. I saw someone with visual impairment. There are many guidelines available in the MTR stations, but then that person required our help. We have empathy, we have compassion for different people in Hong Kong. The manual universal design, it is important for you to implement these concepts in society. Do private developers apply universal design elements? For aisles, corridors, and buildings, are there universal accessibility elements? There's a wide range of people in society. There's actually a broad spectrum of PWDs. Well, I can see the Undersecretary frowning right now. Dr. Tick is correct. We've had discussions on this topic, but our ultimate purpose is to help PWDs in Hong Kong. Undersecretary, well, I subscribe to your view, but I don't quite understand when you said that some policies couldn't be implemented. We are reviewing the design manual Barrier-Free Access 2008. Some requirements are mandatory, so buildings need to comply with the requirements at the time of construction. I don't quite understand why, Madam Chair, you said some policies couldn't be implemented. Well, I don't quite understand why, Madam Chair, you said some policies couldn't be implemented. I understand there may be hiccups, there may be deviations from the standard, but this is different from the policies not being able to be implemented. Well, I know you are conducting a review on the design manual, but from time to time there are complaints. They arise from the design manual in 2008. For district issues that could be resolved at a district level, and it didn't escalate it to the bureau level. For automatic doors in shopping malls, barrier-free aisles or corridors, they are important. For parks managed by the LCSD or for government buildings, the design manual needs to be followed. However, at the community, say the disabled toilets, they don't meet the requirements either. So on the level of monitoring, how can you better monitor this aspect? I have doubts. Ms. Karen Zhang, thank you. In the design manual, there are different versions, and the earliest one dates back to 1985. Next, 1997. Right now, the design manual is 2008 version. When a building was constructed before 2008, the building followed the guidelines back then at the time of construction. So not all buildings comply with the requirements in the design manual 2008, but then for buildings constructed after 2008, they meet the guidelines laid down in 2008. For people with visual impairment, some were born blind, but then some weren't. So in the upcoming revised design manual, we'll cover more guidelines. We'll cater for the needs of more people. For example, for a visually impaired person, not necessarily all visually impaired persons learn Braille from a young age. So we'll see if we can make enhancements in relation to Braille. Say for the seats in movie theaters, there is Braille. If one wasn't born blind, one would not be familiar with the use of Braille. Right now, we have a lot of automatic doors. Say disabled toilets, there are automatic doors as well. That is different from the past. For those who can see, they will be able to tell a door has been opened, but for the visually impaired, they may have difficulty in this regard. We understand that, and we will add more guidelines. Say we will add voice or audio directions. This will enable the visually impaired to understand the situation of the disabled toilet, say whether a door is open or is closed or not. I will draw a line right now. 2 more members have indicated that they'd like to speak. Dr. Tick, 2 minutes. Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you for allowing me to speak in the 3rd round. Well, I'd like to echo your view. That is, the policies are not implemented. We all abide by the law. But when we meet legal requirements, is it sufficient for us to tackle all the problems? If so, we'll have finished the discussion within 5 minutes. Trees cannot be moved, roads cannot be widened. These are the situations, and the only suggestion given to members of the public is, well, you can go off the sidewalk. And that is exactly the suggestion made by different bureaus after a site visit. We need to escalate these issues The Commissioner took part in universal design events in other countries as well. Let's provide guidelines. Let's provide a framework. Well, automatic doors are very heavy. Even if there is a disabled toilet, it is not made convenient for the disabled. If you can implement all the elements of universal design, this meeting would have been concluded within 5 minutes. So we need to apply the universal design concepts. There is a consensus around the world. They shouldn't be made applicable to just a handful of buildings in Hong Kong. They should be made applicable to the whole society, to those who are injured, to the elderly, to the pregnant. We need to make it convenient for all of them. Well, I don't require an answer. Mr. Ren Kong, sorry, I was away. I needed to go to another meeting to ask questions. To improve the living environment for PWDs, we shouldn't take a fragmented approach. We need to make it accessible in all places in Hong Kong. A design manual is not sufficient. It's just applicable to one single building. The city design from building A to building B to building C, we need barrier-free environments for all the buildings in this regard. We need to take the perspective of the entire city design. If we need to improve the barrier-free living environment for the PWDs, we need to steer from the secretaries for departments instead of just the Labor and Welfare Bureau. Well, I don't require a reply. Thank you. Let's move on to the next agenda item, measures and services to facilitate the mobility of PWDs. Let's welcome representatives from the administration to join us. Members who would like to speak, please press the button to request to speak. Second agenda item, we welcome the Undersecretary for Transport and Logistics, Mr. Liu, and his team. We also have colleagues from the Transport Department. I'd like to ask Mr. Ho, Undersecretary for Labor and Welfare, to take us through the paper CB-1 215/2025-03. Mr. Ho, please. Thank you, Madam Chair. We're going to brief members on the measures and services taken by the government to facilitate the mobility of PWDs, including the provision of barrier-free transport systems and rehab bus services. Our policy is to provide appropriate support and assistance to PWDs in need so as to facilitate their travel and help them fully integrate into the community. The Transport Department has all along been working closely with public transport operators to provide facilities and support to facilitate the mobility of PWDs. In all MTR stations, there is at least one barrier-free access facility. The MTRC also uses innovative technologies to help passengers in need to improve mobility efficiency. In relation to franchise buses, some 99% of the buses are low-floor wheelchair-accessible buses. There are also wheelchair parking spaces. There are bus stop announcement systems as well as other barrier-free facilities. Starting from 2018, The government require the deployment of at least one low-floor wheelchair-accessible public-led buses to the relevant routes going through hospitals. There are also other routes that will be put into service. The government has been encouraging the taxi trade to introduce different models of wheelchair-accessible taxis to provide more choices to wheelchair users. Some 30% of the taxis in Hong Kong are wheelchair-accessible. Taxi operators will provide 300 such taxis in phases. In relation to ferry piers, where the situation allows, we will provide barrier-free facilities. There will be accessible toilets and more space designated for use by wheelchair passengers. In relation to rehab bus services, through two rehab bus operators, we provide rehab bus services to PWDs in need. They are mainly people with mobility difficulties and their accompanying carers. Services are mainly scheduled route services, feeder services, and dial-up ride services. The service area covers the entire territory. We provide targeted transport services for PWDs. Apart from the Labor and Welfare Bureau, we have Transport and Logistics Bureau as well as the Transport Department. We're happy to take questions from members. 7 members are waiting to speak. 5 minutes each. Questions and answers included. Dr. Tik Chi Yun.
係同樣嗰句啦，
Well, on the question of road environment and public transport, we have seen improvements in services to facilitate the people with mobility problems and PWDs generally. We know that MTR has been striving to do this, but this is not enough. We have been asking the MTR to do more. For example, a big detour is required if one has to use a lift to access a station. And we have also talked to the bus companies. We asked them to provide better training to their bus captains. And also for buses equipped with dedicated space for PWDs, there should be better way to inform the user. My concern is about taxi. We know there are taxi fleets which would provide certain facilities for PWDs, for wheelchair users. I want to know whether these wheelchair accessible taxis are whether they are charging different fares. I think there should be a reasonable arrangement in terms of fares. As for the rehab bus and dial-a-ride service, we have been told by users that the service is not really convenient or not easily accessible. I will answer the questions other than the second one. As for the taxi fleet fare, well, they can ask for a charge for making an appointment, for hailing an appointment, hailing a taxi through an appointment. As for whether the general fares can be higher, well, there's no provision. There are 5 bidders at present. They are competing with each other. And if one particular fleet is doing better or providing more competitive fares than the others, then the market forces would result in improvement. Well, actually, we already have wheelchair accessible taxis in the market. Well, they are charging more than $100 Well, the users have no choice. They can use the 5 platforms, 5 dial taxi platform, and all 5 of them are charging high fares. Don't just believe in market forces. If that is effective, if market forces are so effective, well, we wouldn't be seeing the problems now. Well, I do understand your point. Unless we provide a subsidy to wheelchair accessible taxis. Well, why should you provide subsidy? You're just the passenger is the same passenger. It's just that additionally they need to place a wheelchair inside. Well, actually, apart from the metered fares, they can also impose a charge for the dialing to appointment service. So we just want to make sure that the market forces can result in improvement. We would enable, we allow them to have this additional source of revenue. Wheelchair-bound passengers in using ordinary taxis may also be subject to the dial a taxi charge if in making an appointment. But that's not in the design of our taxi-free system, that no appointment or dial taxi charge can be levied. We are talking to the fleet operators, and now or in respect of the rehab bus, we are talking to the operators to do to provide better service in their dial a ride service for PWDs. A few months ago, I talked to them concerning the number of calls received. There have been improvements. Of course, we would deploy more resources and purchase more vehicles in due course. Of course, we need to be mindful of the need to make the best use of resources. I'm concerned about visually impaired passengers using franchise bus service. Well, it's very difficult. Well, it's still easier to alight after you have bought one. You know, in a bus stop where different routes are using, they don't know which route has arrived, and they need to ask for help from other passengers. So this is not really barrier-free if assistance from another passenger is needed in order to board the right bus. Well, in other GBA cities and Guangzhou and Macau, they have been doing different things since 2017. They would install an app on their mobile phone, and there's a Bluetooth connection with the bus, and they would know which bus has arrived. For example, route 123 has arrived at this stop, and there's a matching message with the app through Bluetooth, and then they can and there will be a vibration and to tell them which door to use. But in Hong Kong, we have no such installations in place. So I would like to ask the Transport Department and the Labour and Welfare Bureau this question. Have you tried to understand such a new technology, and would you consider asking buses to be equipped with those? Mr. Liu, thank you for your suggestion. It sounds very good. The new technology sounds very good. I hope our bus companies can make reference to this comment. and also to learn from other places where this is implemented. KMB has been doing something to help the visually impaired passengers. In some shape or perhaps our colleague from the Transport Department can introduce the new facilities carried out by KMB. Earlier on, KMB designated some roadside bus stops in Samsui, which can inform the visually impaired on the routes available there, and that their message will be sent to the visually impaired equipped with a receiver on their phone, and a reminder message will be provided to the visually impaired passenger so that they know which routes are available and whether they are at the right place. And they can then choose the right bus stop to use. Of course, it's good to facilitate the identification of the right bus stop. But I was also talking about how we can help the visually impaired to board the right bus. Well, I've talked to the bus companies, and they say this should be promoted and steered by the government. Well, I don't think this is technically difficult. So the question is, do you have the intention to implement this in Hong Kong? Other cities are doing the same. I see no reason why we can't do it. Well, I think this is a good suggestion. Perhaps you can gather the necessary information, and then we can talk to the bus company to see if any government assistance is needed. Well, Mr. Zhang, you have talked to the bus companies. I just don't understand why they say they have difficulties. Well, simply put, this is going to cost money, and they are not very interested in spending money. But to us, it's a better service. It's a barrier-free access. We welcome it. Yes, it's a question of cost, and then it's really going to affect operation costs, and costs will ultimately be reflected in bus fares. So we would certainly look into the cost aspect. Well, other governments, they would carry out pilot projects with assistance from some government funds. And after the trial, well, that will be translated into a service requirement imposed on the bus companies. That may be a good approach to go about it. Mr. Andrew Lam, I first need to declare that I'm a director of the Rehab Society. And the society also provides the necessary service. I have a question about going green, green transport, and the timetable. On the question of conversion of the taxi fleet and light bus, in public light bus into the green vehicles, and $135 million have been provided to some 3,000 taxis for the conversion. And the New Energy Fund has reserved $50 million for access, barrier-free access taxis. $50 million for the taxi industry. But how much is provided to an individual taxi on a per capita basis? Is there a second round of subsidy? If so, what's the approximate timetable?
首先要講翻
Thank you, Madam Chair. First, the scheme of $50 million is actually under the Environment and Ecology Bureau. And the Bureau, the EEB, is still working out the details in relation to barrier-free taxis. There are a lot of different models of wheelchair-accessible taxis. We require the provision of wheelchair-accessible taxis, and it's best to have new energy taxis. Right now, there aren't a lot of models. Not many manufacturers can provide such taxis. In relation to the taxis and public light buses, we hope such public vehicles will go green. For existing models, there aren't a lot. There are more such models for taxis than for public light buses. Right now, we should have a target first. We need to know whether market supply will enable us to meet the target. There aren't a lot of models in the market right now. Thank you. Thank you, Undersecretary, for leveling with me. That's exactly my worry. Just now, Mr. Gary Zhang asked a question and mentioned market incentives. That's why I asked the timeline. In the course of vehicles going green, we wait for 1 year or 2 years. Service providers cannot provide what they are expected to provide. That is because there's a lack of incentives. At some stage, the government needs to step in. You need to take a proactive approach for design requirements. How can you make sure this mode is workable? Otherwise, this is not sustainable. I hope the relevant policy bureaus will coordinate this effort. I'm not saying that you need to undertake to finish this by 2026 or 2027, but I do need to see a policy direction. When one needs to replace a vehicle after 3 years, and when there are no other new options, how can they go green? How can they opt for newer models? If so, we cannot progress. And Secretary, we've heard Mr. Andrew Lam. We're working hard with the EEB regarding whether we can step in to make vehicle manufacturers produce vehicles suitable for the environment. Well, actually, the market is not that large. For right-hand drive e-vehicles, that's what we want to have, and we have already stepped in. You may say so, but we didn't make it mandatory. And it's impossible to make it mandatory in Hong Kong. There is no vehicle manufacturer in Hong Kong. We need to rely on other regions, other countries to do so. We work together with the EEB to make this happen. Thank you. Next, Professor Chen Wen-kong. Thank you, Madam Chair. We have been in discussion about this item. No one wants to be confined to a wheelchair. Some become older. Some have mobility issues. In some NPR stations, there is just one lift, and they need to go a long way before they can reach a lift. For low-floor minibuses, the scheme has been implemented for 7 years. What is the effectiveness? For wheelchair-accessible taxis, there's a surcharge, but the administration failed to give us an answer. The government has a fiscal deficit right now, and we don't want to see the government offering more subventions. No one wants to be physically disabled. We need to be compassionate. We need to have empathy. We need to create an environment for the disabled to make their own living. The government doesn't take the lead seriously. Just like the government has done nothing, in fact. Well, you can order vehicles from the mainland. Does the administration have any target, any KPI? For instance, more lifts in MTR stations. When can buses and taxis meet the target? In mainland China, there are many technologies providing convenience to the disabled. Say there are smart braille, zebra crossing, wheelchair navigation technology and equipment. All these are common in different countries or cities. With the administration, take stock of the experience of the mainland cities in order to provide convenience to the PWDs in Hong Kong. The onus is on the government to do so. In the answers given to members, answers from the bureaus are quite bureaucratic. I hope that you will think from the perspective of members of the public or from that of wheelchair users. That's exactly how you should formulate policies. Under Secretary, thank you. I agree that we need to think from the perspective of wheelchair users or PWDs. That's what we have all along been doing. Is there any room for improvement? I believe yes, there is. Just now, Professor Chen mentioned multiple questions. Say for MTR stations, is it possible to retrofit more facilities? We have close liaison with MTRC. They are very proactive in this approach, in this respect. Is it suitable to retrofit more lifts in MTR stations? Well, the MTRC is doing their best to retrofit facilities where resources are allowed. The government hopes to make improvements using technologies in relation to transport. We adopt the same approach as well. We have the same direction. Just now, member mentioned a very good technology to help the visually impaired to take buses. It sounds very good to me as well. If members have concrete suggestions or proposals, we are more than willing to draw reference from these proposals, whereby we can help the PWDs to take public transport. If members have similar suggestions, we are willing to adopt such suggestions, and we may refer them to other public transport operators. We can see if it's possible for these operators to implement these technologies or measures in Hong Kong. Well, just now I asked about taxis, public light buses, and I also said that the government needs to be proactive. The Transport and Logistics Bureau should go to mainland China to learn from them. Well, I can provide you with information, of course, but it is not my responsibility. It is not reasonable for you to pass the buck to me. I am more than willing to provide information to you, but it is actually your responsibility. Well, I understand. Well, if you have information at hand, you can refer it to us. But I believe colleagues of the TLB have been keeping a close eye on the developments to identify any new technologies. Any supplements? No. Next member, Mr. Dennis Leung. Thank you, Madam Chair. The government has done a lot on barrier-free facilities. Some policies are well intended, but the results may not be as good. The government may not have had full regard to the demands or the calls of PWDs. At bus stops, for instance, there were ramps. And there is little space at the bus stop as a result. Usually, as many as 3 buses need to be parked at the bus stop, and there is insufficient space. That's why the bus at the front needs to move further forward, so the technologies can be applied in real life. There are disputes, as I can see online. For bus drivers to release the ramp, a bus needs to be parked right next to the pavement before the bus driver can release the ramp. The bus driver cannot release the ramp on the road. The government needs to provide coordination on going downhill. We need to help the visually impaired to move around. For wheelchair users, however, the ground isn't even. Probably the so-called obstacles are only 5 mm high or 5 mm tall, but then they already make it difficult for wheelchair users to get past the pavement or to get past the obstacles, and that creates even more difficulties for wheelchair users. For many bus stops, the platforms are very narrow. Wheelchair users cannot approach the platforms, and they will have to get off the pavement onto the road. Or, in some cases, the pavements are very narrow. Miscellaneous items, rubbish bins, they're all over the place. But the government does little to help the PWDs. What is the future plan of the government? What do you plan to do? On road crossing facilities, the tiles may have already been pressed down onto the surface of the road. But then there is still a difference in relation to the curb. And a drop curb makes it impossible for wheelchair users to move around smoothly. Well, I think the administration should have given more regard to the situation. You should monitor the situation better. This problem has been around for a decade or so. But there's a lack of vision for the administration to solve these problems. With the addition of these facilities, I don't want the able-bodied to be affected. And that's exactly how you should provide convenience to the disabled. Mr. Liu, on helping PWDs with a better road design, be they tiles or the drop curbs, there have been year-long consultations before we implemented these measures. We consulted groups of the disabled as well. Yes, indeed. When we solve problem for one category of users, that may create other difficulty for another group of people. We need to conduct more consultation sessions to improve the design. Whether there is sufficient space for people to get on buses or to get in minibuses. While minibus routes go to different places in Hong Kong. And to solve the problem member just now mentioned, we'll have to identify room for improvement and we'll have to strive for improvements. We have to have regard to the actual situation as well. Commissioner?
Thank you for your question. Mr. Leung, you have highlighted some real problems, especially the obstacles for wheelchair-bound PWDs. Well, in the updating of the design menu, we are looking into this. For example, whether the height can reduce from 5 mm to 2.5 or even 2 mm. They do understand that there might be a problem, and they are looking into this. As for the location of drop curve, sometimes the workmanship may not be very good, or it may be affected by wear and tear and long use. But there's a mechanism involving the Highways Department, Transport Department, if they have a problem, access problem for rectification. So a mechanism is in place. Ms. Doreen Kong, with regard to the points made by Mr. Dennis Leung that sometimes the pavement or the road surface is rugged and it's difficult for people in wheelchairs. This is not just a problem with wheelchair users, but even for ladies wearing high heels, it's equally a problem. Some people like me have encountered the same thing. Of course, the design can be made in such a way that it's good looking, it's easy for maintenance and access, it may look fancy. Well, you know, you have certain pavings, but is the paving work done very properly? And otherwise, you may have problems such as toppled wheelchairs and even the elderly people tripped and fell over. I have been invited to some organizations for PWDs to attend activities on promoting accessibility. Together with Dr. Ding Chi Yun, I have attended their activities for 2 years, and Mr. Andrew Lam has also attended some of those activities. What we did was to push a wheelchair to tour around a certain area, and you understand the difficulties encountered. Will the Transport Department management try to gain some first-hand personal experience of what the PWDs are driving at in terms of their difficulties? If you try to use a wheelchair to access from point A to point B in a certain district, you understand a lot of difficulties which are difficult to relate verbally. I know that you have very good facilities, lifts for PWDs, and PWDs are supposedly given preferential treatment. But my recent experience with MTR, station, etc. Well, PWDs do not get any priorities in using lifts. Sometimes even able-bodied people are unwilling to give space to the PWDs, for example, wheelchair users. Sometimes they would even regard waiting the PWD passengers as an obstacle. And also, I would want to talk about the blue permit and the gray permit for PWDs. I have been told I've been receiving complaints from blue permit holders for 2 years because there are a lack of sufficient parking spaces for the blue permit holders, that is PWD drivers. And you have issued a lot of gray permits issued. They are able-bodied drivers, and they would take up the space for PWDs. You know, these are blue permit holders have to park their vehicles and then go to work and so on. They have given me certain concrete information, and it's now for 2 years, and still the problem persists. This week I'm going to see them again. I'm a bit concerned about meeting them because I can do nothing to help them. As for the fourth question, blue permit and gray permit, well, the Transport Department has done a lot and will be doing a lot as well. So perhaps in a moment I'll ask my colleague from the TD to respond. As for the uneven paving, well, you can, of course, trip not just wheelchair users, but also ordinary people, including senior citizens. Well, it has to do with road maintenance, road repair and maintenance. If the Highways Department receives such complaints, that they would handle the matter expeditiously. They have a performance pledge. And sometimes you can the road surface has suffered some subsidence, and it may become uneven as a result. So we need to enhance road maintenance to reduce such problems. As for gaining personal experience as a wheelchair-bound person, well, I regret to tell you that I haven't gained such personal experience, but I don't know whether Transport Department's office colleagues would be able to have some experience. Well, in the past, the ramp is provided for wheelchair users. But now the policy has changed. Well, the ramp is not really accessible because of the gradient. So we now have a new standard, that is we provide lifts. I hope members will understand that we are making gradual improvements. As for the priorities should be given to PWDs for using lifts, say in MTR stations. Well, the MTR has been doing more publicity through the signage and through the broadcast to advise people to give priorities to PWDs in using lift. I think this can be resolved through more publicity and public education. Transport Department will answer the other questions. Mr. Kong. Well, my mother was a wheelchair user, so I do understand the problem faced by PWDs. As regards blue permit and gray permit, we have heard from the associations of PWDs and some council members. We have consulted them over the issuance of such permits, and we have conducted questionnaire surveys of blue permit holders and gray permit holders. So we would tighten up certain requirements, such as eligibility requirements, and also the the submission of medical certification documents and to align the requirements of the two groups of permit holders. Last year, we informed the PWD associations and the permit holders that are starting from the 1st of April this year, we're going to tighten up some application requirements. Certain criteria will be become straighter. I just want to offer a suggestion. But the great permit holders are supposed to use the vehicles to take PWDs to their destination. They are not supposed to be occupying the parking space for PWDs. Perhaps you can install some CCTVs to prevent this. If they want to use the parking space, they like what they do in Japan. They have a bar which is entry bar at a very low level, and they use a card to enter, to use the parking space so that the PWD passenger can alight. And it's only valid for, say, two hours. And if you exceed the parking time, your car will be impounded. You have to make sure that the blue permit holders can really park their vehicles and go to work. And for the gray permit holders, they are supposed just to use the space for alighting the PWD passenger. Tinkling with the application procedure is not going to help a lot. Transport Department would respond to that. We'll look into that. Our meeting time is supposedly to end at 12:45. I would like to extend the meeting by 15 minutes. Is that agreeable? Yes. I have just one simple question. I had to attend another meeting a moment ago. I'm sorry about that. The Transport Department and the Highways Department has the Universal Accessibility Program. It's now in stage 3, and you want to collect. You have collected views, 300 of them, from district personality and council, but nothing much has been done to follow up the 300 suggestions. Well, we have TPS, we have HOS, and public rental housing. Well, in their design, they provide a lot of open space, not just for the resident there, not just for passage, and it's also for access to important facilities. Some time ago, together with people from Highways Department, we went to Po Pui Court in Kwun Tong, and that's a trading estate. It's a big building complex. And the access is available for anyone in that district to access the older district of Kwun Tong. But the access is connected by stairs. A lot of people, you go up the stairs from Po Pui Court to Hip Wall Street and so on. It's an HOS. So it's easier to provide a lift there under the Universal Accessibility Program. My issue is whether you can try to get some breakthrough instead of just doing this for one project.
Mr. Liu, thank you. Yes, the Universal Accessibility Program is very popular. We received a lot of comments. Unavoidably, we have a lot of projects ongoing, and we'll have to set the priorities right. We'll take into account the complexity as well as the urgency of the projects. And we will give priority to the items suggested or requested by the District Council. Just now, Mr. Biltang mentioned projects with the Housing Authority or for the HOS scheme, then these will be more complicated, and we'll have to handle land resumption matters as well, and that will have to do with consent, and that is more complicated. Well, I'd like to follow up. Some projects are supported by the District Council, and the owners' corporations make it clear that we are more than willing to collaborate with the government. Does it mean when these key criteria are met, then you will give the green light to these projects? Is that correct? Well, we're more than willing to consider these projects. Let's not talk about priority. Let's just talk about whether a project is feasible or not. As Mr. Tang mentioned, there were examples in the past. It doesn't mean we avoid such projects when we run into difficulties. It depends on how we can enhance efficiency and speed. Well, just so long as the government is willing to undertake these projects. Thank you. All right, my turn. Measures and services to facilitate the mobility of PWDs. Just now I asked about rehab buses as well as taxis. Honestly, last year, the Audit Commission published a report on rehab bus services. Up till now, it's been some 10 months. I'd like to know the progress of the review. Can the Labor and Welfare Bureau or the relevant policy bureaus give us more information? There are 2 bus operators when it comes to rehab buses. There's a high driver wastage rate, and we have a total of 221 rehab buses, 127 scheduled routes, 14 providing point-to-point routes. Is there any improvement? Is there any interim report? Any buses without drivers or any buses without any patients? Well, I work in the NT constituency. Some elderly PWDs need to attend medical consultation, but then they will have to be helped by care teams onto a private cars. It is how they go to the hospital for a follow-up. Well, I think the Labor and Welfare Bureau needs to think how to help these elderly people. For Clearwater Bay, for example, even if there is any low-floor rehab bus or low-floor bus, they are just renting these vehicles from someone else. The government spends on buying rehab buses. I'm not sure how many hundreds of millions of dollars of funding are provided by the SWDs. As I understand, rehab bus services are not costly. Now that there's a lot of demand, and PWDs share with me that the usage rate is actually not high. Will you rationalize the routes? Undersecretary, Mr. Liu. For taxi fleets, you need to take into account the actual operation in society. For grassroots middle class, they will have to move around in society as well. They also drive the local economic development. That's my question. Well, on rehab bus, I will defer to the Labor and Welfare Bureau. In relation to the Transport and Logistics Bureau, how do we enhance mobility for disabled and the elderly? We make it clear that we want to provide convenience to the needy. We have a clear target. Not just for the able-bodied, for the disabled, we want to provide convenience to all people in Hong Kong as well. We need to make it convenient for the disabled to use public transport. Quite many taxis are wheelchair accessible, but of course, there is an issue with charging. In this regard, the Transport and Logistics Bureau wants to provide better transport supporting measures, and whether it should be a subvention or whether it is a fund, I will defer to the Labor and Welfare Bureau. Bus companies are not willing to increase the frequency of buses, so in Clearwater Bay and in Sai Kung, elderly people cannot rely on public transport. That is exactly the situation right now. Otherwise, care teams wouldn't have to take these elderly people into private cars for follow-up. Yes, I understand. I've heard your view. Mr. Fletchan, thank you. We had a discussion at the last meeting. Since then, we have had meetings with operators. We have identified improvements. Just now, member mentioned dial-a-ride services for taxis. And there's an increase of 4%, reaching 90% in relation to the acceptance rate. I'll see if my colleague has anything to add. After 2024, different organizations made adjustments and enhancements to services that concerns the Rehabilitation Society. Adjustments are made to routes. The purpose is to see whether they can take more patients. There's an increase of 20% in relation to patronage. In relation to feeder routes, organizations of the disabled were consulted. We've had liaison with hospitals, say Parkway Hospital, Timon Hospital. They have lower usage rates. Between June and August last year, we made adjustments. We improved the services, say by extending some service routes to serve more people. Parkway Hospital made enhancements in January this year. Apart from feeder routes, during weekends, we have added more routes having regard to the needs of the disabled. Thank you. We have finished the discussion items. Next we come to AOB. Any other business? We'll have to discuss with the administration the next meeting date. Afterwards, we'll inform members. Any more views? No. Meeting adjourned. Thank you, members.